And I now give the floor to the representative of Afghanistan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Mr. President. Let me congratulate the United Kingdom on its leadership of the Council this month. I thank the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for presenting his first report on the situation in Afghanistan. Also allow me to thank the SRSG Ambassador Tadamichi Yamamoto and Afghanistan's Independent Human Rights Commissioner, Dr. Sima Samar, for their briefings. Given the severity of the situation in my country, I would like to dedicate my statement today to the challenging security situation, hidden agendas, the peace process, and the ever-increasing necessity for regional and global cooperation. Mr. President, in recent months, dozens of terrorist attacks across Afghanistan have claimed scores of innocent lives. In January, 3 simultaneous terrorist attacks in Kabul, Kandahar, and Helmand provinces killed and maimed over 160, including 6 United Arab Emirates diplomats. In February, the Supreme Court, our symbol of justice, was attacked, causing numerous fatalities. Last week, 2 separate attacks in the heart of Kabul killed many civilians. Finally, just 2 days ago, Afghanistan's largest hospital was attacked, leaving over 140 killed and wounded, many of whom were doctors, nurses, and patients. The Taliban have claimed responsibility for most of these attacks, but regardless of whose names are being labeled on these attacks, our own investigations have clearly established that they were generally plotted beyond our frontiers on the other side of the Durand Line. This, Mr. President, is the fundamental factor which needs to be addressed. The UN Security Council issued prompt statements condemning these attacks in the strongest terms, for which we are thankful. The statements underline, and I quote, the need to bring perpetrators, organizers, financiers, and sponsors of these reprehensible acts of terrorism to justice, end quote. It also urged, I quote, all states in accordance with their obligations under international law and relevant Security Council resolutions to cooperate actively with the Afghan authorities in this regard, end quote. This is indeed what Afghanistan has been asking for many years. My government and people would like to know why, after countless terrorist atrocities and specific Security Council statements condemning them, we are still witness to impunity for perpetrators and orchestrators of endless violence. Mr. President, let me be very clear. The conflict in our country is not homegrown, as some desperately and deceptively try to portray. On the contrary, it is the nexus of illicit narcotics, violent extremism, and state sponsorship of terrorism with regional dimensions and global consequences. Tragically, it has morphed into an undeclared war by a neighboring state that has for many years and still continues to coordinate, facilitate, and orchestrate violence through proxy forces and more than 20 terrorist networks. These groups benefit from a full-fledged external infrastructure to keep Afghanistan off balance for motives that are inconsistent with our desire to live in a peaceful and prospering region. In earlier statements to this Council, we have emphasized time and again on Pakistani actions that sustain terrorist activities in our country. Today, let me quote leading Pakistani officials themselves. General Pervez Musharraf, who led Pakistan for 8 years as president, proudly commented in 2015 interview with the Guardian newspaper that, I quote, Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI, had given birth to the Taliban to counter Indian action against Pakistan, end quote. Last year, Mr. Sartaj Aziz, Pakistan Prime Minister's advisor on foreign affairs went on record to say that Taliban leaders reside in Pakistan and that they have influence over them. A couple of weeks ago, Mr. Ashraf Jahangir Qazi, former ambassador of Pakistan to the United States, Russia, China, and India, and UNSRSG to Iraq and Sudan, wrote in the Herald magazine of Pakistan, quote, "After the Soviet defeat and withdrawal, we, an inside bracket, wittingly or unwittingly, unleashed a ruinous civil war and imposed a barbaric and medieval Taliban upon the hapless Afghan people." End quote. His words are but confirmation of the truth. Quote, "Pakistan talks one policy but walks the other." End quote. Mr. Hossein Haqqani, another former ambassador of Pakistan to the United States and Sri Lanka, categorizes in clear terms in a New York Times 2013 article the links between Pakistan's state apparatus and the Taliban over time, and mentions in the context of peace talks that, I quote, "The Taliban and their Pakistani mentors have hardly changed their arguments or their tendency to fudge facts," end quote. These quotes and admissions that I just read were not rhetoric from Kabul or blame game as often claimed by a known member state. This was Pakistan talking. Mr. President, against this backdrop, in February, a series of unfortunate terrorist attacks in Pakistan killed dozens and wounded many more innocent men, women, and children. As is the case, Afghans always share the pain and anguish of our Pakistani brothers and sisters. However, the government of Pakistan immediately and without any regard for any investigative process or clear facts blamed Afghanistan for the attacks and resorted to increased breaches of our territorial integrity, the closing of the main border crossings, blockading trade and transit, and harassing our nationals traveling to or living in their country. Such measures constitute a clear violation of principles of WTO and the rights of landlocked countries, including their access to sea. From January till today, we recorded at least 59 instances of violations of Afghan territory by Pakistan military forces, including 3 violations of our airspace, over 1,375 cross-frontier artillery shellings that caused dozens of casualties, displacement of 450 families in the middle of cold winter in our eastern provinces, burning of our forests, illegal construction of infrastructure near the frontier region, and hostile maneuvering of tanks and heavy weaponry. The travesty of decorum in neighboring relations did not cease there, as the familiar pattern of obfuscation of facts and diversionary tactics took over. We were then issued by the government of Pakistan a list of so-called 76 suspected terrorists in Afghanistan, which after close inspection by us and our international partners was found to be in desperate need of verification. Our reaction to all these provocations has been sober and methodical. We have submitted 25 protest notes to the government of Pakistan, and in the past few weeks summoned their ambassador to Kabul on 3 occasions. We have submitted to their government a list of 86 known terrorists and 32 Taliban training centers, including Haqqani network centers, asking for their immediate closure. We have asked for a third-party verification of the 2 sides' efforts. No response has yet been received. The UN Secretary General, this Noble Council, and other international partners are all appraised of these developments. Mr. President, while terrorist attacks in Pakistan are strongly deplored by our government, we are surely witnessing the blowback effects of using violent proxies as instruments of foreign policy, which was adopted by decision-making circles in that country in the 1980s and is still being pursued to this day. In other words, the chickens are coming home to roost. We have reminded our Pakistani counterparts on many occasions that you reap what you sow. We say once again, it's time to change that failed policy for your own sake. Desist from using radical terrorists as foreign policy accessories and genuinely join the international fight against all forms and shades of terrorism. By bleeding Afghanistan, Pakistan is not only trying to create a stalemate on the battlefield, but it is also hindering the political track. Hoping to gain legitimacy for groups such as the Taliban, Pakistani decision-makers continue to use plausible deniability and shifting blame as part of their defensive tactics while manipulating geopolitical fault lines to their advantage. They forget that legitimacy in my country flows through the people and constitutional order, not through acts of terror, intimidation, and forced imposition of extremist thinking and radical behavior by misinterpreting and misusing our sacred religion of Islam. Talks leading to a peace process can only succeed when policy is revised, the use of sanctuaries is prohibited, terrorist financing is curbed, and violence is renounced. Peace cannot be achieved by playing lip service and pretending to be a selective victim. Mr. President, as we speak, the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces are battling with great resilience and determination a network of regional and global terrorist groups who have come to Afghanistan for various objectives. In 2016, our forces prevented the Taliban and terrorist affiliates to capture major population centers. In January, we adopted a 4-year national security strategy which focuses on bolstering combat capabilities, leadership development, and improving unity and coordination of command. The fight against terrorism will continue with even greater resolve on the basis of our security strategy. That said, continued support from our international partners remains critical for the sustainability of our forces over the long haul. In that light, I wish to reiterate here again that Afghanistan's strategic partnerships will in no way serve a detriment to any country within our region or beyond. On the contrary, investments in Afghanistan's security are in fact an investment in regional and global security. Mr. President, for years, the lack of a meaningful and result-oriented channel of dialogue aimed at addressing root causes of tension between Kabul and Islamabad has created a huge trust deficit. Reducing this deficit requires political will and healthy interactions between our two countries. On our part, if we look at the record, Afghanistan has always been ready to engage in constructive and result-oriented dialogue. We welcome any earnest and transparent initiative to help us reach that stage of dialogue. In our view, the Quadrilateral Coordination Group, or QCG, and the recent 6-party Moscow Conference on Afghanistan can serve useful in that endeavor, if utilized and coordinated properly. These initiatives, among others, emphasize a set of guiding principles, most notably that any peace process should be Afghan-led and that the region must support the Afghan government in its quest for sustainable peace. Moreover, they also recognize the importance of having all relevant regional and global actors on board in a constructive manner. We know from previous experience that any prospect of success in peace efforts rests on a number of important principles. One, any attempt at resolving current and/or historic issues between governments require a strong national political will and an impartial and agreed-upon international arbitrator in good standing. Two, all sides need to define and agree on the scope of dialogue and negotiations, leading to a specific set of deliverables and outcomes that can be supported by regional stakeholders and eventually guaranteed by the international community. Three, all sides need to be willing to address the root causes of conflict, not its byproducts, and resolve areas of contention by adhering to and making use of international law, pragmatic precedents and/or other best practice and judicial norms and void of presumed realpolitik assumptions. 4. Given Afghanistan's sensitive geopolitical position, all peacebuilding and anti-terrorism efforts in the long run need to have all key stakeholders on board, take the complexities of an evolving regional and global security architecture into account, and agree to a status that assures stability, balance, non-interference, sovereignty, and positive engagement in Afghanistan. And 5, keeping principles of sovereignty and non-interference central to our objectives. This requires Afghanistan to turn into a symbol of international cooperation where global and regional powers set aside their rivalries and short-term interest by agreeing to cooperate in a spirit of confidence for long-term mutual benefit. Mr. President, finally, in a few days, we will celebrate Nowruz, start of our new year and the first day of spring, a festive occasion that symbolizes peace, solidarity, and togetherness among our people and the wider region at large. But as recent attacks have shown, Afghans will celebrate with a heavy heart. On the other hand, in their planned so-called spring offensive, the Taliban and other terrorist groups are adamantly focused on producing more horror, panic, and fear, leaving little room for joy among our men, women, and children. This time we hope to collectively counter their new season of murder and mayhem. Our brave and courageous national security forces are ready to highly determined to defend our people with full confidence and strength. We survived the post-transition 2015. We countered and defeated every major plan of the terrorist groups and their foreign backers to capture and control main population centers in 2016. And in 2017, we will, with your support and by the grace of God Almighty, humiliate and destroy the enemies of peace and security in Afghanistan. We are fully committed to making sure that our new year will be one in which we will open the way for durable peace in our country, our region, and around the world. We join Secretary General Antonio Guterres in his appeal to the international community for making 2017 a year of peace. For us, it starts at home. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Afghanistan for his statement.